they specifically said, we do not like the form of a tax credit because if we want to do that with our kids, we couldn't afford it now and we couldn't afford it after.
Representative Durrant, thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
We're tied together through a school district. You're also in Ada County. You live down in Kuna. A lot of things. You care about education. I love education. You had a hot piece of the voucher or tax credit voucher, whatever it might be. The tax credit issue this year in the session. Do you want to talk to me about that a little?
Yeah. So I sit on the House Rev and Tax Committee. So this year, we got it got introduced in our committee a bill that would provide a tax credit for families who have their kids in a basically not in public school full time. If they were part time, they would be able to, but full time wouldn't.
Okay, so like what does that mean? Like what are the nuances? Because again, people that aren't necessarily familiar with it, when you start talking about credits, some people get confused about, is it like school credits or is it, again, just explain the concept if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. So basically it was kind of an upfront. If you paid your $5,000, you could put it on your taxes when it got filed. And then you had basically you itemized out what you had spent, and it could, then if you were in the first group that were able to get it, because it was first come, first serve, then you were able to get a $5,000 per kid. So easily a family of 4 could have got $20,000 if they were up there at first because of what they had already spent on kids. And then it did have a $10 million part of it was for those that were more the lower social economic to kind of have an upfront grant at first.
In the event that they didn't have the money. So the $5,000 came to you if you're like, hey, look, I spent this money on a private school instead of public school, and I'm going to put that onto my taxes. And then you would get a credit for the money back from the state. And then there was also a portion, it's like, okay, but if you don't have the money right out of the blocks to send your kid to private school and get this tax credit, there's an upfront payment that people in a lower socioeconomic run had availability.
Yeah. And it also had if your child would be classified as special needs, special ed, they were able to do, I believe it was $7,500 for those.
Gotcha. What did you do with this? Because this concept of taking public funds and giving them to private entities like education, this has been something that has been getting kicked around easily since the 90s. Right? Like nationally, this has been a conversation about, hey, who actually delivers education best? Is it private school? Is it public school? Once you open the doors to using public funds for private schools, there are all kinds of questions about, okay, well, what are those private schools doing, right? Are they religious based? Are they not religious based? Are they successful? Are they not successful? Because obviously starting a private school is a completely different endeavor and has different regulations and requirements than running a public school. So there are a lot of problems here. And talk to me about what your position was or what your concerns or likes and dislikes of the bill were.
So for me, it was hard because there's such an emotional tie to all sides when it comes to the bill. People are very strong emotional that they want it or strong emotional that they don't want public funds in those type of schools and their settings, that if people want to do that. So for me, I kind of hit a point because, it was so contentious. We had a 6-week period between the introduction and the actual hearing that, it was very contentious all the time. People just one way or the other, really having such an emotion, they had such an emotional connection to the bill that it was hard. And so for me, I tried working with the sponsor, seeing if there was some little tweaks or something that I could get to. But then I had to kind of take the emotional out of it on what my thoughts were and just focus on what the words were on the paper. And so for me, once I was able to do that and just kind of I had the amount of outreach from people across the state, from constituents for and against it was amazing. The amount of people that came out just to be able to respond to that. For an instance, when we had the final hearing in committee, we had 2 folders that had just emails from people who emailed directly to the Rev and Tax, whether they were for it and against it. And one of the folders were ones that were there that morning. And we met, I believe, like 8:30. So people were very, very like tied to what their stance and stuff was. So when I took it apart and just looked at the words of it and started really looking at it and how it would affect my district. So District 23 has CUNA for the CUNA part of Ada County. It has Canyon County, which is kind of around Lake Lowell and south, and Melba. And then it has all of Hawaii County. So the joke of it is kind of CUNA's a metropolis of the district, just with the dynamic and the way it is. So I had to stop and really look at the people and the diversity and really the rural aspects also of my district. So when I did that and started really kind of breaking it down, and we were given the numbers that there's approximately 44,000 kids that right now would have been able to be an option for this.
And 44,000 kids
that are in
just in your district?
No, in the state.
Okay, great. MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
So then it was like, okay, the sponsors were, this is just kind of a starter. We're not trying to do a full blown. We'll just see how this had worked. But when you have all these people like, oh, I need this now, when it came down to it, with the bill was a total of 50 million. But for those current 44,000, only 40 million of it would have gone to them. So that's 7,000 to 8,000 is all of the amount of kids, all of the kids out of the 44,000 that would have been able to have had it right then and there.
So 44,000 kids would have qualified for this, but only a tiny, like 20% of those kids, we would have only had enough money to even give it to 20% of those kids.
Yeah.
And was there a breakdown of how you determine which 20% would actually get the funds?
So it was a first come, first serve on your taxes.
So whoever filed first?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so that was also kind of a hard because, you have this few, but you also, like everyone knows and we heard it from parents that they are scrimping by to be able to meet that needs, or other kids, grandma's paying for it and other people are paying for the resources that, those kids would have benefited from it more, but there was going to be a lot of people that still had the same issues that they would be barely scrimping by. They would be probably not able to meet all of their needs trying to get it, or had the fault thinking, oh, I'll be able to get it. And they weren't. And so then it had a 10 million portion of it, which that portion was for those that are more the lower social economic, but you weren't in private school. So it was a grant for an upfront, let's, try it out. But that was only good for that 1 year. So they could use that money that year, but then the next year, they wouldn't qualify for the tax credit because they'd spent that money with the grant. So then those people are then back to, are they going to be able to afford it? So if you had a kid who thrived in a different setting, but then what do you do? Because now you're back to where you can't afford it because you had to pay up front to then have the tax credit be basically a reimbursement later on.
Here's a question, and forgive my naiveness around this. If a $5,000 tax credit means that if I pay $6,000 to the state of Idaho in taxes, I get $5,000 back, right? Or if I owed $6,000, I get to deduct the $5,000 credit, and then I only pay $1,000. Yeah. What if I only paid the state of Idaho, or was slotted to pay the state of Idaho, like $1,000? And they're like, but we'll give you a $5,000 tax credit. It's like, okay, thank you, but I'm not paying $5,000 to take the benefit of that. What happens to that? The person who's only paying like $1,000. Like, you don't get a check from the state, right?
My understanding is that you could.
Oh.
So
it's not even just a tax credit. It's literally like a direct deposit function.
If you didn't have that, like if you didn't have to pay that extra, then yeah, it would come back. Like if you were owed that money in it with the way your taxes come back, then it was like, okay, it's part of your check because of it. was my understanding.
That seems problematic. But, then again, what do I know? So what did you think about this? Ultimately, it sounds like you're saying, hey, look, it was only going to hit a small portion of students. It was on a first come, first served basis. And even the people that did pull their kids out of public school to go to private school based on the, hey, we'll give you this upfront money, they wouldn't have had the reimbursement from the following year. And that would have been a problem.
Yeah. So my ultimate, when I went through that, and then I had different people in the district, especially some that, they're barely making ends meet. Both parents were working. I mean, the economy's gone crazy. People are scrimping and saving everything they can, living paycheck to paycheck with both parents working, that they specifically said, we do not like the form of a tax credit, because if we want to do that with our kids, we couldn't afford it now and we couldn't afford it after. Like, the tax credit left out a huge group of them because they had to pay upfront. So for me, I kind of, after going through the words and going through what was there, like, my thing was, okay, if this is the road Idaho goes down, and if Idaho decides we're going to start funding it, and this is the way to do it, is this going to serve the people of Idaho? And to me, no, because of the fact of being the tax credit left quite a few, like, they were still out. If you had wanted to have your kids that way, you still couldn't, because you couldn't pay the money up front. And the grant portion was, great for those that could get it, but you still, what do you do that next year? And what do you do if you didn't qualify for it?
So it didn't pass, obviously.
Yep.
Excuse me. What happened following that? If you had these binders filled with emails, like, what was the response from people?
So I would say I probably had easily a 8 or 12 to 1 of emails or conversations and stuff with people that were against it instead of for it.
So the communication you received from the state was overwhelmingly, like roughly 90% saying, don't do this.
Yeah. And it wasn't just the argument, we're taking public funds away from public school. A big argument too was, okay, if this is what we're doing, this doesn't work for me. I don't want it this way. This program doesn't help me start my kids out in a school.
Man, it's complex. What do you think about the funding for the state schools in general? Like, public school funding is a very, very tricky beast that everybody's kind of grappling with, right? And that's kind of at the heart of this, that people feel that the public school system is not adequately providing an education or a sufficient education for their kids, and they're paying this money. And there are a lot of people that, like in the Valley View School District, they were able to eventually pass a bond or levy. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but point is, they literally had like broken sewer pipes. I spoke with Senator Trakel about this. They literally had busted sewer lines underneath classrooms that filled the classroom with a sewer-like smell, like that was actually coming from a broken sewer. They're like, we have all of these problems. Like, how are we going to be producing the best possible results if we're not getting funded appropriately? What's your position on the school funding?
So one big thing that kind of ties along with that, being on the revenue tax. So 2 years ago, we passed 292, and then this last year we did 521. With focusing on, in that committee, it's a focus of tax relief, property tax relief specifically, as well as a little bit of others, but being able to find a permanent tax relief. And so by doing that, we really switched, and like, the sponsors have worked amazing. And especially with 292, they did so much work with the committee members. Like, our whole committee was completely on board, had a full understanding of what that bill was going to be. And so we really felt like a very unified, this is what's going to work. This is how we can push this, because we understand it. We know exactly what this bill is working towards. We know what the goal we're trying to do. But there was a frustration of, it wasn't going to fix stuff overnight. But our big goal is to switch to try and do those school facilities, start the school facility funds, to where ultimately it's going to take time. But the ultimate goal is to where there can be this pot of money that these school districts, if they need to bond or if they need to do levies, that they're doing it against this pot of money from the state. And so they're not asking their taxpayers to provide that money.
Explain 521 to me.
Well, it's the Christmas tree. So it's not the easiest thing. And I will say I do not fully 100% understand that bill. But I completely agree with the concept of trying to have I believe it was $2 billion that have the state bond, because the state was able to get that money at a cheaper rate that any school district would be able to get. And so then bonding out that money and then being able to distribute it to the different school districts, which there's still quite a bit of angst against it, just because your larger school districts ended up with more money than the rural school districts, which Salmon School District is one of those that has the sewer issues and the small, but they haven't been able to pass a bond for a long time. And the amount of money it would put on each property holder is just insane because it's so rural. There's not a lot of people there. And so the purpose of that was to then try and start working and chipping away a little money that we can help to then hopefully we can do a little more. But, it's got to be baby steps because you can't just fix it all in one time. The amount of money that all these school districts would need, the state just could not provide it all at once.
Right. It's pretty, especially West Ada is a unique, that school district, I hang out in, you hang out in. And it's interesting because it's such a complex problem with such a large district. Splitting the district seems to be an impossibility because you would instantaneously have to build like a high school in Star, and Star already needs more elementary schools. The district is growing, but it's growing asymmetrically. So you have pockets that are growing really, really intensely, and then you have other pockets that have aging populations that don't have as many kids, that are not sympathetic to passing bonds and levies and things like that. And then you have, if you look at the tip top of Avamore to the bottom of Kuna, it's kind of like, do the people in Avamore necessarily care dearly about the people in Kuna? Well, maybe not, right? They're not, if their needs of Star, do the people in Eagle care about the needs of Star? Well, maybe not, right? And I interviewed all of the people running for school board this last year, and some of them were saying, look, we really need to figure out a different way of managing this, because the problems we're running into and convincing the entire collection of geography and all the varying people within that these are the things that we need to do. Those are huge problems. And it's just, it ends up being, you have things that are underfunded or not maintained, and, man, it's a problem.
Yeah, and with the growth that's coming into the state, it's so hard to try and fully understand. We've hit a reactive. We weren't able to start out proactive and kind of get ahead of this growth. It came and it hit hard, and so everyone's trying to be reactive. So in Kuna, where I'm at and where my kids go to school, we have one high school and a part of a high school because that was all that we were able to fund at one time. And then it's been trying to get another bond to pass to try and get more. They need another elementary school. It's growing at such a rate that we're full.
Right.
Everything is full, but it's hard to want to say. You hear a lot of these people who've been here forever. Why do I want to have my property taxes and increase? And why do I want to have to do these bonds when it's these new people that are moving in is the reason why we have these issues? And so that's such a hard thing too, because you still have that sense of community. It's all of us together trying to work at this, which I think is really where we came to with the 521. And one aspect of 521 is the building and that they would be doing is for classrooms. If you want to add a gym, that's not part of the funds. And so it's really building that classroom. But you look at a lot of the schools, the athletic programs still bring a unity to it, to the community, that you feel that if it comes up, okay, we need this, that maybe the community might be a little more willing to foot some of a bill for something like that if a lot of the other things are being able to take care of. So that's been an idea thrown around is, okay, let's work to make sure we're building the education, building those places. And then some of these other communities, let's see if we can get more community involvement, maybe to help with those. But then also like try to bring in the unity of the communities like there used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. This is all really tough because the area is growing, and it's interesting talking to different people. Like, for instance, I'm in the midst of all of the publishing all of the Ada County Commissioner interviews that I was able to do. Tom Daly did not want to do one. It's fine. Or I shouldn't say that. I offered via text message and email, and Tom Daly did not respond. I have no problem with Tom, but somebody got mad at me previously when I said somebody didn't want to do one when they hadn't responded. So a little caveat there. Anyway, and there is this anxiety of, first off, California always gets blamed for people coming in here. It's like, there are a lot of people moving here from a lot of different areas. Not saying that California is not a major contributor, but, it's tough understanding or hearing people say like, this is all your fault. And it's like, well, Californians didn't cause inflation, right? Californians didn't cause the mortgage rates to go up, right? Californians, there are a lot of problems that, I think an increasing population has delivered to the area. And, obviously I'm part of that because I moved here from a different place. But at the same time, it's like, look, we're all trying to do our best. Like I didn't move here to ruin anything. And there's a certain portion of population and people that say, hey, no matter what, if you moved here, you'd ruin things. It's like, okay, fine. Like you got me. Like this, I live in Dry Creek Ranch. It used to be a ranch. Like it used to be, agriculture. Oh, speaking of agriculture, I've been meaning to ask you, Kuna is one of those areas that really borders a lot of open space and a lot of agriculture. And there are some people that are saying that we really should be developing more of that land for housing to take pressure off cities and, really trying to work together to ameliorate the problems with people, again, like the rising housing costs and stuff. What do you think about that?
So
there's a big one because it hits like a lot of different problems.
So for me, it hits really close to home. My husband's 4th generation farmer in the Kuna area. They've been there since 47. And so ag to me is what Idaho is based on. Like there's certain aspects, there's agriculture, there's the mining, there's a lot of values that this is what Idaho started on. This is what really built our economy up. This is really what gave us our name and where we're at. And so it's kind of sad to think that a lot of people prefer the houses over the ag land. And it's hard to get a tractor down. It's hard to basically provide for the people around you. When people don't stop and look, like agriculture is what's providing your food, your fiber, your fuel. Like we're here to try and feed America. We're not here to try and slow everyone down because we drive slower on the roads than the others. And so you almost want to say, well, we were here first. Everyone, like they came in here. But there's a reason for growth. Like growth needs to happen. It just needs to happen in a way that still allows us to provide for everything we need. And so this year we passed a bill that was an ag protection area bill. So it's kind of just a framework to start some of these, really start this discussion and start areas that can be put in this agriculture protection to try and keep areas to where Idaho still has ag. It still is true to its roots. And for us, I mean, Kuna used to be small, and now we literally farm between the houses, which is the same for most of the Treasure Valley. I know a lot of farmers in Star, Middleton, that area, that's what they do. You farm between the houses and you try your best. And not everybody understands it. But everybody needs to understand you need to eat. You need to have the grains and stuff for the dairies. Because what a farmer grows goes into more than just what comes straight to your plate. It goes to all the animals. It goes to a lot more aspects than what you think. And it's such a huge driver of Idaho economy. And so being able to, I think, have this tool that these cities and the counties especially are able to, okay, in our planning, this area is ag, this area plans to be ag. Now we can, okay, plan around that instead of a lot of the comprehensive plans as they are, you're one cell away from being houses is kind of a mindset that some of them have. And so they just kind of plan over you. And so they don't plan around. And so being able to hopefully get this mindset in and hopefully be able to get to where people understand, okay, this is just as important as making sure we have houses for the people around us.
So how do we protect ag land? Like, what do we do?
I mean, that one's such a hard one because everyone has a different aspect. So a big thing with that bill that it didn't end up getting in it was being able to prevent eminent domain, being able to prevent these cities or highway districts or that from being able to say, okay, well, there's growth. I'm now going to come in and take 10 feet or whatever off this side of your field. And that's it. All I'm taking is this 10 feet. But they don't understand if you have a center pivot on that, you're now taking that 10 feet off the whole thing around because now you've got to shorten your pivot. Or if you're taking 10 feet where the water comes in, now there's a whole bigger issue of trying to make sure that there's a different route and that they're going to be probably the ones having to put in, but making sure it works so stuff can still get water and making it so we can still get in and out of the field. So we have a grain warehouse. So when it comes wheat season, there's trucks from all over the valley that come in and bring their wheat in. And at one time, there was one of the farmers, they were kind of frustrated because there was construction that had it blocked off to where they couldn't even get into their field. They were able to work with some people and get it to where they could get in, but being able to understand that, okay, we also need to make sure that there's access. I mean, we've had many times that we've had to fight with the local highway district because they're trying to shut roads down and we need to be able to get from one field to the next. And so I think the biggest thing is just making an awareness and making it to where people are educated enough to understand we're not trying to be an inconvenience, that this really is a benefit to everyone by having the agriculture, having this green space, having this open space that is allowing it for the farmer to farm, for them to be able to, it's their job. They're providing for the family just the same as anyone else who goes to an office building.
Right. That 10 foot away from the pivot, the center pivot, I love math. I was in education forever. And that's a concept that's, if people aren't really familiar with it, like let's say you got to go from 10 feet to 9 feet, or let's say 100 feet down to 90 feet. That may not seem like a lot, but in a circular formation, the area that you're reducing is actually something like a 25% area or 20% area from the entire thing.
Yep.
So, if you have a square plot and you just take 10 feet away, and you're like, hey, look, you got a square, like it's a 200 by 200 and you got a 100-foot radius swing here. Like I'm just going to you have 4,000 square feet or something like, it's even greater. That's like 40,000, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. The point is we're just going to take 10 feet along this area away from your entire piece. It's like, yeah, but you just reduced my production by, what is it? Something like 20%. Like it's an astronomical amount of reduction if you reduce the radius of a pivot.
Yeah. And the work that it takes, because you're taking a full, like people don't understand, you're taking a full tower. So it's not just this quick, I'm just going to shut this off. No, like you're having to redo your thing and cut it down. And it's not this quick, simple, easy, yep, here we go. Water on or off. No.
Can I ask you something, like real talk? What am I supposed to do? Like, I didn't move here to ruin anybody's time. I didn't. Like, I genuinely didn't. I moved here because I'm raising 3 young men that I don't want them to have to apologize for being men as they get older. I wanted better public schools because the public schools in my areas were going insane and we had already moved our kids out into private schools. I wanted economic capacity for my kids. I didn't want them to feel that once they moved out of the town we were living in, they were never going to move back, right? I wanted a sense of community. The place we were living was exceedingly transactional. People would move in specifically for the schools and for a job and would never leave their house. Like I moved here because I had dear friends that had moved here. Like I moved here for so many reasons that I think are so great. And I think a lot of people moving here are moving for similar reasons. Not everyone. I have no idea what everybody's doing, but what are the people moving here supposed to do when they realize that they're now being pointed to as the primary problem in the area?
Well, let me ask you a question to that too. So did you move here because you liked the values, the way that Idaho runs itself? You know, basically all the things that make Idaho, Idaho. Is that the reason why you moved here?
That's a very good question. And I think it would be impossible for me to answer that because I would not presume to say I know all the reasons why Idaho is Idaho. I moved here because I thought the people working in restaurants were offered a level of decency and respect, which I appreciated. I thought there was economic integration that I thought was very, very important. And we didn't have these where I moved from, you had these massively segregated communities where I grew up in a very low end community. Okay. And right next door is this people having private jets and stuff community. Right. And I had grown up in the low end community, crawled up through the public schools, was able to go to a good university, and then was able to create a business and then move in at the lowest end to the nice community. Right. So I grew up in Concord, moved to Danville. And there was no respect between these two areas. There was no cohesive community. There was no there was just no decency. So to the degree that you're asking, you think you may or may not agree that Idaho offers decency and respect to within communities and within people. Yes, I moved here for that. To the degree that you feel that Idaho tries to deliver a neutral public education that doesn't try to take over parenting from the parents and try to take over the kids. Yes, I moved here for that. To the degree that, people are just people here. Yeah, I moved here for that. I don't know the other things because I'm not you, and I'm certainly not your husband who's, fourth generation, but I feel like I moved here for some good reasons. I don't know if they're what make Idaho, Idaho in your mind.
And well, to me, if those are the mere reasons you moved here, then those are the reasons that you should be with the rest of us fighting to keep us the way that they are. And I think part of the reason why a lot of these new people get such a bad name is you have, they always say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So you have those that move in, they miss something about where they were before, so they want to change it. But the reality of it is that's not everyone that moves in. That's probably not even the majority of the people that move in. And so, but those that do move in from out of state, that's the squeaky wheel got the grease, and that's what they feel like, okay, this is where I'm lumped in. And so for them to just sit back and be like, oh, I'm afraid of this. No, and most of them are doing it. They're behind the scenes fighting to keep what they came here for, why they came here. And so I think that's just the biggest thing is, yes, these people move in, they kind of keep quiet because the squeaky wheel, but to be able to raise your voice with other Idahoans and be like, this is why I'm here. I do not want this changed. The decency, the respect that people have for each other. That's huge. And it's really, you see it across the nation. It's kind of starting to be a lost aspect of just being a good human to everyone around you. And so I think the biggest thing that people move in is just need to raise their voice a little bit louder of, I came here because I want to be a part of this, and I want to keep this. This is where I want my kids to grow up. I want the decency. I want the values that Idaho stands in or stands for. And I want to make sure that I am hearing a voice to help keep that, even though I am a transplant.
Look, I love that. But the last thing I want to be ever is labeled as somebody who moved from out of state and is then telling the rest of the state of Idaho, you don't understand. We're losing our decency. We're not great like we used to be. And of course, the retort is what do you mean like we used to be? You got here 30 months ago. What the hell are you talking about? And they'd be right. Right. Mm-hmm. So the idea that the answer, and I'm not even saying you're necessarily wrong, but the idea that the answer is for me to stand up for what I think Idaho is when I just got here and be like, look, guys, we need to do this because I'm coming from California and I've seen how it gets really bad and I'm right. I never want to be that person. Like, I spend my days asking questions, trying to understand what the problems are. How do we preserve agriculture? What do we do with all the people moving? What do the people moving in who are naturally, like me, part of the problem that you native Idahoans are experiencing? And by the way, I'm an Idahoan now too. I got my driver's license. I only missed one question, and it wasn't the open range question. I got that one right. But like, these are things that people need to do. You know, like, we need to understand each other. And it's so look, I try to not get discouraged, but it is disheartening when I spend my days trying to occupy a neutral platform so people can better understand each other. And it's almost like there's a portion of the population that no matter what wants to dislike anyone else who's moving here. And I think that's true of any area, right? Like, you know, I found myself having those issues when I was living in California. It's like, oh, these people moving here. It's like, but now you're that person. I don't know. How do you reconcile that? Like, if you're saying, hey, look, the answer is for you, Matt, to stand up and say like, hey, Idaho, we are losing our decency. Do you really think there's a place where like transplants like myself have that voice and would be well received?
Well, give it 3 weeks and you've got an excellent opportunity to do that by making sure you're informed on who you're voting for, which one stands with the platform that their platform stands with why you came here. And so I'm not saying to get out on a soapbox and start preaching from the corner, because that's not going to work. But being there, how
about a garage podcast? Could we do that?
Well, you might as well.
Might as well. They're letting anybody on the airwaves these days.
True. But the biggest thing is getting your voice out there to vote, being an active member in your community, being involved in, as simple as being involved in your kids' schools.
Right.
Like, you're showing that you're trying to help. You're not trying to change. You're just trying to help where you're at. Like, it's kind of a corny phrase, but they say to strengthen where you stand. That's the best way you can do, to strengthen where you stand. It's the little things. Most people, when you say, oh, this is what you need to do, they go to such a big thing. But it's as simple as going to the polls. And like I said, being involved in your community.
Right.
Going and supporting a local sporting event of kids, or just going to the local play, showing up at a city council meeting and, being a voice if there's something you have questions about, making sure you are informed on all aspects. And a lot of it's been lost. You show up how many of us complain about a city budget or that, and yet how many of us showed up at that budget meeting?
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I agree with you. And I firmly believe that the activist culture that's kind of taken over or dominates people's playbooks, which is like, I have to change these gigantic things while people neglect the simple things. Like, well, did you call the principal? Like, you want to dismantle the entire public education system because you found something that happened distasteful. Like, did you try to engage the administrators and just say, hey, this happened? And that's the thing. Like, a lot of the clips I put on that get, upregulated on the algorithms, and people obviously start making comments and they have these horror stories. And my question is always like, okay, did you get a hold of, like, if it's education based, did you get a hold of the principal? Did you tell them? Overwhelmingly, like, they don't care. It's like, well, maybe they do. Like, maybe they didn't know what happened, or maybe there was a misunderstanding, or maybe there's, as flat as a pancake egg is, there are always two sides to it. Like, maybe you should find out. And again, I don't know anything. I'm an idiot. Like, I'm not saying I have any answers, but people in good faith communicating with each other seems to be the best option we have if we are to maintain and preserve our culture and dignity with each other. Listen, we've talked about a lot of things. I've had you for a while. Did I miss anything? Is there something you want to talk about?
That's a good question. There's a lot you can always talk about in this world, but
there is. Maybe you'll have to come back.
Maybe
Maybe
if you want me back.
Oh my God. Well, listen, thank you for coming in, Representative Durrant. I appreciate you. Good luck with the campaign. Thank you for doing what you've done as a legislator and then as a campaign person. I tell all the people that come in, and I genuinely mean it. It's not, I can't imagine it'd be fun to run for something. I've never done it, right? I just talked to a lot of people who are going through it, and every single person's like, oh, it's a lot. This is a lot. And that's rough. That's rough, but it's important to have these competing ideas because the alternative is of just having one person run unopposed is not going to produce the best results for things. So win, lose, or draw, thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. That means a lot because for me to be here, politics was not something I was ever wanting to be in. Like I had been involved with Farm Bureau and at the state, the national level, and I'd been trying to get into grad school when it came time for my first election. And I didn't think I was going to get in. I did. Ended up having to file and make it official and pay everything the Friday before the primary. And I wasn't about to get cocky and thinking I was going to win the primary. And so I just wanted to be a person. I just wanted to be a voice. Like, I don't want to be a professional or at politics. I struggle with the campaigning because I don't like talking about myself and why you need to vote for me. I just want to be the voice for my district. I just want to be able to know that my district is represented, that the issues there are brought up, and that I vote for my district. And so that's really my whole reasoning for doing this. It's not to try to be a politician. It's not because I want to seek something else. I literally jumped in really head first because this is my biggest and really my only real politics that I had been involved in was when I decided to do this. And I was amazed at how much I love it because I'm a natural introvert. So it's really kind of pushed me out of my limits, but it helps me understand people more. I just want to be that voice. I work so hard when I get to that Capitol to I check my emotions at the door. And when people are mad at me, I work so hard not to take it personal. They're not mad at me. They're mad at the title. And when you have people from out of state, you have people from all over, they kind of attack. And I just have to not take that personal. I just have to say they're mad at the title. And I just need to show up and try to represent my people the best I can. And if they want me back, I'd be so excited to do another term. But if not, then I served my purpose. I served my course. And I don't regret any vote that I did because I still stand behind my votes that I went and supported my people and supported my district. So thanks for having me.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.